Good morning. I think yesterday I mentioned finishing the book of Acts today. Well, we're not going to. We're going to just read about half of chapter 27, and we got a whole other chapter, so it'll be a little bit yet before we get done with this. Today, though, we find that Paul is being transported to Rome to see, the emperor. And of course, he doesn't get there today, but in chapter 27 starts, when it was decided that we, so here again, sounds like maybe the writer of this gospel, this book, is along with, that we set sail for Italy. They transferred Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. So we know the name of the man who was in charge of the protection, maybe not just the protection of these people, but of their safety, and to make sure that they didn't escape, because some of them, maybe unlike Paul, were not innocent or not that way. But they embarked on a ship, and it tells the name of the town, and it was about set to sail for the ports along the coast of Asia, and then it kind of gives us a little bit of a rundown of some of the different towns that they hit, or different cities that they hit, and islands that they sailed past, and here it says that they sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. So when you're sailing, they didn't have big engines driving propellers on these ships. They depended completely upon the sails and the wind, or maybe they had some oarsmen, at different times, but basically the wind. And if the wind is against you, you can't sail directly into the wind. You have to sail kind of this way and then that way, and you tack back and forth against the wind, so that it'll, so if you got a straight wind out of the north, that you can kind of sail, the northwest and then southwest and then, or northeast rather, and you go back and forth, and the wind will still help. But there's a definite skill in sailing and knowing how to control the ship in all of those things. And then there's verse 7 says, we sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Sindus, as the wind was against us. And if you need to put into a specific port and you're fighting against the wind or sailing against the wind, that makes it much more difficult. And you'll find out here soon as we're reading that verse 9, since much time had been lost and sailing was now dangerous, so when the winter season came and the winds changed and it was colder and storms were more vicious, there were times when they didn't sail because of the dangers of the sea. And it says that Paul advised them, saying, I can see that the voyage will be filled with much danger and heavy loss. And he urged them, not to set sail. But it says, verse 11, the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and the owner of the ship rather than to what Paul said. And you think about that. Paul wasn't a sailor, and the owner of the ship, of course, would want the ship to be making money, to be bringing the goods to another port, and that's how the owners of the ships made money and paid for the ships, by the business that there were there. And the pilot, he's the one in charge of the ship. He's ready to go because his wages also depend upon, the ship being profitable. And it says, verse 12, this harbor was not suitable for spending the winter. The majority were ready to set sail. So evidently the harbor didn't have the protection from the winds. If the winds came at the wrong directions and there was no protection, or not the proper protection, the winds could bash this ship into the shore and ruin the ship. and just the warmth and the safety of the men were a concern as well. So they set sail, and they're hoping, it says, on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, where they would spend the winter. And it says it was a harbor on Crete facing southwest and northwest. So evidently you could come into it from two different directions. There was a, kind of a channel of water through there. But it was a place of safety for the ship and for the people. But I like that where it says, on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix. So, I mean, they've taken off, and it's kind of a, well, we're hoping we can get there, but, we don't know. And then verse 13 says, when a moderate south wind began to blow, they thought they could achieve their purpose. They weighed anchor and took off, sailed past Crete. But soon a violent wind came. The storm came, and as we read further on in here, when we start tomorrow's reading, it says the 14th night had come. So this was a long, drawn-out storm with much wind and waves and terror, and they put the sea anchor down, and they were trying everything they could to save the ship and to save the cargo, but they soon began to throw the cargo overboard. In verse 18, we were pounded by the storm so violently that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard. So, I mean, they're rendering the ship kind of helpless in front of the storm as well. And it says, neither sun nor stars appeared for many days. So this was a massive, massive storm that these people on this ship were enduring and going through. And I think about, some of the thunderstorms that we have roll through here with, the powerful lightning and loud thunder and the winds that are often accompanying them, and very possibly hailstones, with some of the severe storms. And, I don't know if they had hailstones hitting there, but, just the terror of the continued wind and rain and the storm-tossed seas. Many days, it says, all our hope was abandoned. All hope of our being saved was abandoned. And what could save them, really? They're out at sea on this boat. And we call it a ship. I don't know. How big was this? They didn't have luxury cruisers like we have today. They're still, their large ships, I'm sure, were quite small by today's standards. And I've seen videos of boats going out, and I remember seeing a little boat one time on Devil's Lake, and the way the waves were blowing and that boat was going, I thought there was no way that I would be on that boat. And I talked with many people too that when some of our lakes around here, they get those big waves, and Devil's Lake is one of those, and Sakakawea. When the wind is blowing in that vast expanse of water, the waves just build, and they can get to be huge, and they can easily swamp a boat, tip it over, and you're at peril that way. But who's going to be there to save them? A bigger boat, or if by luck they could find a harbor that they could somehow get into. But verse 21 is, Paul says, after they'd been without food a long time, Paul said, men, you should have listened to me. Yeah, okay, well, hindsight's 20/20, we know that, and should have, could have is the expression that, isn't always helpful. But what we need to do is always be ready to move forward and go from that way. So Paul says, I urge you, keep your courage. There will be no loss among you, but only the ship. For last night stood by me an angel of the Lord, God, whom I worship, and I was assured that I would be able to see the emperor and that all in this ship would be safe. He says, so keep up your courage, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we will run aground on some island. The ship was at the mercy of the seas. The ship was at the mercy of the elements. And, you know, sometimes we find ourselves that way too. You know, our lives seem to be topsy-turvy and so many different things going on that we're lost, and it seems like there's no hope. But there is always that hope, that promise in God that no matter what happens, you know, that God will be with us. And you know, when we have that faith and when we have that trust, it makes everything a little bit easier to get through. It doesn't take all the pain away, doesn't make everything just smooth sailing, but it gives us that assurance that in the end it'll be okay.